Hi, everyone. I'm Henry DeVries. I run a company called Indie Books International, and welcome to our weekly podcast, the Marketing with a Book podcast. We like to invite authors and experts and thought leaders, and that's certainly our topic today, to come share some wisdom on business development, on speaking, on marketing with books and speeches and their experience. They also get to meet some of the authors from Indie Books International, and they're here to be ready to come in with a question if there's something they want us to probe. So welcome to being here. We like to start with our author roll call. And I'm going to start it today with Chris Hodges and then go to David Goldman and tell the listeners who you are and your book. So take it away, Chris.
Super. Thanks, Henry. My name is Chris Hodges. I am the author of the upcoming Noble Automation Now: How to Profit, Innovate, and Motivate with Intelligent Automation. The essence of the book is to bring out the best of humanity while using these automation tools to make businesses succeed. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I am an avid Indie Books fan and family member.
Thank you. And then so nice, David.
Thanks for that, Henry.
Let's go to Joe and then John.
Thank you, Henry. I'm Joe Pallo. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm writing the book, How to Sell Nothing, What Really Happens in the Sale.
Great. And Joe, good to see you. Look forward to that.
You're doing right. That's good.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to go to John Lockhorst and then Mark Leblanc.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Lockhorst, and I am not too far away from Joe in Andover, Minnesota. I am the author of Mission Critical Leadership.
So, John, you're going to join us next week in the hot seat. You're going to tell us about your views on business development. Now that you're an author, tying into that to speaking and getting people to look at your book. So we're looking forward to that next week.
Yeah, I am as well.
Okay, thanks. And then Mark and then Mason.
Thank you, Henry. My name is Mark Leblanc. I run a speaking business out of Minneapolis, and my most popular book in the first half of the year was Build Your Consulting Practice, co-authored with Henry.
And we have another book, Rainmaker Confidential, that's in the art department right now. So we'll be looking forward to that. Thanks for joining us, Mark. Let's see, Teresa Ashby. Welcome, Teresa.
Well, thank you. I'm Dr. Teresa Ashby, and I am the author of Better Implementation Now: Why Great Strategies Fail and How to Fix Them.
I like how you're holding the book. You kind of got that Harlem Globetrotter palming a basketball thing going. Yeah, I usually have to use my thumb, so good job. I skipped Mason. So Mason, the chutzpah guy.
Yes, hello everybody, my fellow Indie Books family and friends. It's a pleasure to see everybody again tonight. I'm the author of The Chutzpah Advantage. I am not palming the book. It's the purpose of the book is to share lessons and behaviors I've learned over the years in regard to business and personal success.
Mason, I tell the opening story in your book a lot, but I have to say, this is from Mason. Here's the chutzpah guy. It's a Jewish mother story, but I was making the point of how when you tell a punchline, the last word is a punch word, and sometimes people bury their punch word in the middle of a sentence. Not as good, as you know, because you're also have been a professional on the stage, making people laugh, making people think. Laugh was a byproduct.
Yeah, unintentional, I think is what you're saying.
Oh, no. Well, that's another speaker we have. You need to be funny on purpose, Judy Carter. Mason, thanks. And great, congrats on the strong showing on your book coming out this spring.
Thank you very much.
Did very well. At this point, I usually offer the mic to Mark if he has a piece of wisdom to share with us. Mark is the chairman of Indie Books International. And Mark, talking stick to you.
Oh, I have some wisdom. Thank you, Henry. I want to talk a little bit about focus this afternoon in this episode. And the more focused you are, the easier everything becomes. And focus is nothing more than making decisions and having the discipline to see them through. And I want you to look into your rear view mirror and actually go back to simply this morning, if you can remember, because most of us have good intentions when we start our work day. And I have several questions to ask you. One, did you wake up with the weight of the world on your shoulders? A lengthy to-do list, client delivery work that you needed to get to? Or two, did you wake up hoping or wondering, I want to grow my business. I want more business of any type. Where am I going to find some more business? Or nearly every single one of us has multiple profit centers, whether it's speaking, consulting, training, coaching, products, online courses. Did you wake up with your focus on a profit center? I want to book more speaking engagements, or I want to book more training assignments, or I'm hoping to sell more products or sell more seats in my online course. Was your focus on delivery and everything you had on your plate? Was your focus just on more business of any type? Was it focused on a particular profit center, or were you extremely focused? And I look at this next question as the $1 million question. Did you wake up this morning and set your intentions for the day around the answer to the $1 million question? What is the one specific program, product, presentation, or service I specifically want to sell more of? Imagine how your day might be set up a little bit differently if you could carve out a sliver of just 30 minutes of extreme focus around the one item in your menu that you specifically want to sell more of. Again, the more focused you are, the easier everything becomes.
Mark, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And it's so nice that we have the time to be together with our authors and hear different things. And I always appreciate you coming on. Okay, our guest for today, Robert Sher. I did a Forbes.com column on Robert, and it touched on so many important things. It certainly touched on what it means to be a thought leader, how to go from being an expert to a thought leader. What is that? So those are some questions to consider. It also touched on the power of proprietary research that we do, and researching something that's of interest to our target-rich audience, the one we're really after. What is it that they want to know that they can't ask their competitors about? You can do that and find out. And the ripples of good that happen from doing that research, because you find people who are advocates, you find people who will be referral sources, you find people who will become clients. It happens every time. And Robert's here to share some of that with us. He is the founding principal of CEO to CEO. That's a consulting firm of former chief executives. When I read that, I thought, oh, wow, there's a job to round up a group of former chief executives and work with them. So they help mid-sized companies. That's their focus. And he was chief executive, and this is a lot of street cred for us, with Bentley Publishing Group from 1984 to 2006. So he stirred the firm to become a leading player in the industry. So he knows what that's about. He speaks frequently and has published extensively on the successful leadership traits and skills of CEOs of mid-sized companies. He is also a regular columnist for Forbes.com and has shared his wisdom in many other places, including the Harvard Business Review Online. We probably would love to hear how that gig went down. He's authored 2 books and is releasing his 3rd book in August, Driving Midsized Growth, People. Please welcome Robert.
Thank you. Yeah, the class. There we go.
Yeah, well, we just jazz hands on Zoom. Okay.
There you go. Perfect. Perfect. Well, happy to be here, guys. And, happy to share what I've learned and what I'm struggling with and driving to get through, all at the same time. I know there's a lot of wisdom in the group overall. What I thought would be interesting is sort of an evolution I've had from sort of being a person who writes to being an author to being a thought leader. And I've taken way too long to kind of learn it and understand it in the way that I did, but I think it might be interesting for you guys. And I'm just going to talk to this. I'm not going to, don't have any slides or anything. And so, I was a CEO for 23 years and decided it was time to move on and became a consultant. And I had a good runway to think about doing that. And when you've been one CEO of one company for a long time, heck, are you even employable? I owned the business along with 2 or 3 partners. And so what I thought I should do first is start just creating some written content. I was the high school newspaper editor. I enjoy writing. I learned with writing. I wrote a little bit for the trade. And so about 1.5 years before I knew I was going to be exiting, I started going out and interviewing CEOs in a group called the Alliance of Chief Executives. And it's like a Vistage group in the local Bay Area, but I was a member. And so I had access to just go to any CEO, and I didn't care what I wrote about. I said, look, something you did that was really smart, that's a lesson to be learned. Let me interview you. I'm going to write that up into a story. And it started to build a body of work for me. And it was useful. And I got to network a little bit and meet other CEOs. And I'm really glad that I did it. I probably did 70 of them, just, kind of 1 a month or 2 a month, just tick away at them. Was really valuable. What was a little bit surprising is I didn't really round the corner to being a consultant. I wasn't one yet. I wasn't trying to get business, but the kind of takeaway was that I was a great reporter. And I kind of realized that thought leadership marketing isn't reporting. And the articles were mostly about what they did, not my opinion or my expertise about what they did. And so while it was a good start, none of those people ever became a client, actually, because I was almost there more as a reporter. It's an interesting takeaway. And then I thought I should have a book before I really got started. So in 2005, 2006, I had one great story that I really wanted to tell. I bought 4 companies, and the third one was just a heck of a deal. So this is the feel of the deal. And I wrote it over the course of a year in mornings with my kids jumping on my lap, daddy, daddy. And then I have to stop typing. I'm an early riser. And it's the story of our 3rd acquisition. I think it was when Pat Lencioni started writing, and I thought I can do something like that. And it's a fun story and really useful. And it's a really good book. And it definitely built my credibility. I know I landed at least one client. I got through networking, and then right when I come out with the book, and I went into his office and I brought him a copy of the book. And he was a high energy guy. And within an hour, he had me in a management meeting, and he said to everybody, I want you to know I've hired a published author to help this company. I had no idea what he was hiring me to do. He hadn't read the book because I just handed it to him. And I later learned that John Kagi was not a book reader, but he felt so excited about that became a really important client for probably 2 or 3 years early on. So that's, the power of the book. I did do a couple of M&A related consulting work, but broadly, I'm not an M&A guy. And I wasn't taking my practice in that direction. And right around then, they changed the rules to where you had to be licensed to charge commissions for brokering any kind of a deal. And I was more of a CEO coach kind of a guy. And so while it's a great book and I'm very glad I did it, it didn't really line up with where my expertise was going and where I was building a practice. And it was hard to know that before I started actually my practice, but it just didn't kind of line up. And so that was, a lesson for me that thought leadership marketing is not just telling your story, however interesting it might be, right? There's just more to it than that. But I had a good solid start with consulting. It rolled along pretty well. And probably around 2011, 2012, I said to my wife, I think it's time for another book. I'm going to make it more on point this time. And she said, well, honey, there's an awful lot in my brother-in-law's garage of that book. You're not that great at maybe leveraging those books into business. Maybe you should, get some help or something, right? But I said, no, I totally got it. I've learned all the lessons. I closed the door to my study, and then I typed in thought leadership coaching in Google, right? And I found a guy who is a thought leadership coach. And it was an interesting process that I started to learn. I had already written 12 newsletters around the topic that I wanted to come out with, which is what is it that makes companies, mid-sized companies, get stuck? And I sent that to Bob, and Bob said, the good news is you're a very clear writer. The bad news is there's not a single example in there. A lot of it isn't necessarily thought leading. It's not going to find a publisher very well. You've got a lot to learn. And I did. And he really introduced me to research, right? What you have to do to have a research-based book. And that if you do the research, you get stories and case studies that then create a really powerful read and a powerful book. And so he also looked at my value proposition and ripped me up and, helped me in a number of ways to really take the business up to the next step. The other thing he told me is if you want a real publisher, they want to know how you're going to market and sell your book. And so, do you blog? No. Do you, how much do you speak? Well, not that much. And so he also said, the first thing is to really get you a quality blog post, because that's going to be a part of when we eventually go to a book rep, someone that's going to find you a publisher, they're going to want to know that. And so he helped me get that Forbes column. And, we, between help and writing and focus and using his template and so on and so forth, really helped me got that in place, which was powerful. And I also started doing a lot of research for the second book. And that took 1.5 years. I probably overdid it. I was busy. And there was this other problem that came up. So I got some PR inbound from the Forbes column, and they wanted me to interview this guy, founder of a company, and he looked like a mid-sized company. So I said yes, being really careful. And halfway through the interview, he says, you're asking me really good questions. What do you do? How do you know how to ask these questions? And he turned into a client that came out of the research, 6-figure client. I was going out to Georgia once a month for 1.5 years for that client. And that came just from interviewing. I had to say, look, I'm interviewing you for research. If you want to talk about buying something from me, great, let's do it in the next call. Because I was really trying to keep the two separate. So that was great, but it kind of got me busy and not able to do as much work on my book. And then I was doing a second interview with someone I had networked to, the leader of a company called Rodan and Fields. They do facial products that are sold through network marketing. Yes, I asked the right questions in that interview too. Became a second client, huge client as well, just from the connection and asking the powerful questions. So, wow. And I ended up getting help in editing that book. I probably could have done it myself, although professional writers are freaking amazing at what they can do with text, because I really got that busy. And that book, and that's this one, Mighty Midsized Companies. We found a publisher. They published it. We did promotion around it and all of that. That got me a number of talks, many talks, but one was in Toronto. There was someone sitting at one table there. They became a huge customer 6 months later. And the book really has created significant growth. And we probably, from before the research started, we have tripled over those years in volume based on the elevation of the thought leadership marketing that came around that book. So really, really powerful. The last story I'll tell you before I keep rolling is got a call 2 months ago from a guy who said, "I've been reading your book every year with my entire leadership team for 10 years. I knew that wasn't true because the book hasn't been out for 10 years, but that's what he thought. And I just wondered if you did consulting, which of course, it's like, dude, it's in the back of the book. And of course I do consulting. Why did it take you 6 years to figure that out? But he did. Reached out, wanted a proposal, signed it, cut the check within like 3 days. And we just concluded a really big engagement with him, and it's going to keep coming, right? So that's the most recent over the transom that came in from the book. So really exciting. I was at his office last week, and he showed me a framed picture on the wall that says, "We will be a mighty mid-sized company." It has a couple of elements from around it. It's been there for years. Really gratifying to see, and having a client like that, super gratifying as well. 1,300 person mortgage banking firm. So book absolutely helped. It also crystallized a new differentiator for me, right? Which is that I'm not just a CEO coach, but we're the mid-sized business expert, right? And that book really put us there. And so increasingly on our website, we started to change that. It's not just that we're CEOs, because there's only us that does this sort of thing. There's a lot of CEOs, but there's very little focus around mid-sized companies. And so we morphed and changed. And in about a month, we're actually going to rebrand from CEO to CEO to a new company name called Mastering Midsized. So we're really doubling down on that focus. But without that first book, and without the challenge from my coach that said, "What's really different about you? What companies have been the most fun? Where can you be a little bit ahead of everybody else?" Because as he explained, thought leaders don't come out with it second or third, right? You've got to be giving some sort of novel new idea to your audience, maybe not new to every audience, but new to your audience, in order to catch their attention. And Mighty Midsized did that. What the Forbes column also did is it kept me writing, because you have to keep submitting things, which meant I had to keep researching and reaching out and touching people. And that has become a constant thread for us. And I'm leveraged now. I have people that help me with that. And I can do elements and interviews and structured and write my prescriptions, and then get help getting it cleaned up and fleshed up, become a bit more of a process as we've gotten busier, but really powerful. And it keeps me learning, because there's so many people out there that do things that are really smart that I never would have discovered, but research helps you discover it and then share it. And that's one of the big values that I really bring. But even with Mighty Mid-Sized Companies, I've did a lot of talks, not in the past year, not in person. And I didn't feel and still don't feel like I get enough uptake from it. Give a talk, flying out there all that time, maybe 3 people want to talk, and maybe 2 actually talk, and maybe 1 does something. And the book focused on the problems, the growth killers, right? 7 silent growth killers. What are the growth killers? Are we the growth killers? No. We help with the growth killers. There's all kinds of advice in that book. It's very practical about how to avoid growth killers and overcome growth killers. But what I've started to realize is when people come out of that talk, they're like, he's the mid-sized guy. There's 7 bad growth killers. But what doesn't leap into their brain is, what does that guy and his firm do? What do they help me with? And even though all of you, if you heard my talk, would get it, it wasn't like stuck in the brain of my audience so that they would go, "I want to hire you for that, buddy." It wasn't happening in the way that I thought it should. And so, about 2 years ago, I said, you know what? I'm going to start to focus on growth drivers. And between some research and experience, I picked 9 growth drivers that I really do believe are the keys that mid-sized companies have to systematize and focus in order to get results. And I made sure that those were 9 areas that we would love to consult in. Some we're super strong in, some we're not as strong in yet. But it's like, if I'm going to write a book, dang it, and I like writing and I like thinking and I like speaking, but all this is to grow a consulting business that's powerful and unique. And gosh dang it, when I talk about a subject, call it recruiting, I'll give out some gems, but I want people to go like, "Oh, those are good gems. Those guys must do recruiting. I need recruiting. I will hire them." So it's this alignment more and more and more so to the thought leadership I'm putting out to what I do. and we'll put out that thought leadership. We'll get hired to do it. We'll do it. We'll learn from that. And that will generate more thought leadership and more case studies that are directly in the line of path at the services and work that we want to do. Okay. And so we really put the push on research. So through speaking, we started to reach out. Anybody do smart things around recruiting or around talent development, any one of those 9 growth drivers. We tried to do some quantitative research, really hard to get the numbers to matter. So we've since dropped that, wasted some money, tried it, not ready for it. But plenty of really rich stories. And so what we're doing now, this next book, the one that's due out in a month, is the first 3 growth drivers, right? So Driving Midsized Growth People contains the first 3 drivers, because I just didn't have what it took to do 9 different research campaigns and write that whole book. And I've also become increasingly convinced that a smaller book, this is a 30,000 word book, can be really powerful, easier to read, a little less expensive, easier to push out, and that I'd rather have more frequency around important works than more time between bigger works that are harder to assemble. The other challenge I had with Mighty Midsize is there's 7 growth killers, there's a lot in it. And so to try to give to an audience a chunk that they can really wrap themselves up in and become actionable is harder and harder the more you cover in a book. So smaller book, 3 chapters. There will be a workshop on each chapter. I'm going to try to prevent myself from having a workshop with all 3 in there, because then you cover too much too fast. Now, what do you stand for? Which of the 3? I'm not sure. Indecision, don't get hired. And so that's what we're really focused in. And I'm also tying into it the full loop. And so we're creating a prescription. I'm just going to pick on recruiting because it's chapter 1. Here's what we believe about systematizing recruiting in mid-sized businesses. And here's an analysis for that. And we're going to go in and actually help businesses set up that recruiting function. And we're going to utilize our best practices prescriptively with our clients. And those will become case studies and an evolution for the actual practice of the thought leadership. So there's thought leadership marketing, where we put out stuff. And then there's thought leadership, which includes the practicing of it, the iterating of the learning, and then bringing it back to another round of thought leadership. And that means that we will have to keep growing as a consulting firm, because we have to actually have all the talent we need to actually go deeper in each of the areas that we profess to be thought leaders in. And we'll see how that goes. I have a lot of fun doing everything that I do. Maybe you'll have me back in a year, Henry, and we'll find out whether that's working well or not working. I'm always learning new tricks, but that's just kind of an interesting evolution that I'm still working my way through. And be happy to answer questions or hear wisdom or ideas.
Oh, I got questions.
Awesome.
The first statement, I just wanted everybody to note the proprietary research that he's doing, and he didn't get hung up on, he had to do it quantitative, and it had to be numbers and measurable. And he's doing what's called depth interviews in the trade, in the market research trade. And you can learn so much, and many of the leading business research that comes out of the Harvard Business School, Stanford, is this approach where they're doing this type of interviewing. Because in business, we can't run too many A/B experiments and have a control group and we give a placebo to one business. It just doesn't work the same way, even in social sciences, that we can do things. So that's a takeaway. And I'd like to remind all of us that we should always be doing research. And that means interviewing people in our lane. Something we mentioned Harvard a couple of times here. I'm curious, the Harvard Business Review Online, what did you do with them? How did that come about?
So through my thought leadership coach, right, Bob Boudet, great guy, he we looked at all the options and we got into Forbes first. So he knew the leadership editor, a guy named Fred Allen. He's retired now.
Yeah.
And you know what he told me is, look, you can be a guest blogger. I don't know if it works this way now, but and so I worked with Bob. So I invested some money here, right? And I've always been a good, clear writer, but taking it up a notch is important at these levels. And so I'm always humble to great writers. But you know, we submitted a guest article once we had 3 ready, and Fred liked it. Of course, you know, a really professional writer had reviewed it. So of course, Fred liked it. I would have failed if I just tried to do it myself. And then, you know, a week later, we sent him another one. And after we sent him 6, he didn't like 1, but he took 5 of them. He said, look, all right, I know you know how to write. You're doing a good job. Here's your own Forbes column. And yeah, there's rules you have to follow and so on and so forth. And we've done that. So that's how we got that. And then we really wanted to get, before Mighty was published, we wanted to get a print article in Harvard Business Review, right? So book was written. I got some help to write sort of a summary, if you will. And Bob had some connections at Harvard Business Review that helped. They took a look at it. They said, well, you know, we don't see it in print, but, you know, we're interested if you want to do a post for each chapter, we'll do it online. And you know what, if a gazillion readers, all the gazillion mid-sized businesses, which there aren't, were to just, you know, read and read and read, maybe we'd consider a print version. So like, all right, we'll do that. And so they ran one each for each chapter successively, pre-publication on the book. And totally exciting, right? Totally awesome. But the story doesn't end there, Henry. So that was in 2014, right? Summer of 2014. And about 5 months ago, I get a call from a Harvard Business Review editor, like, hey, you've written for us before on Midsized Companies. We're doing a special interest area around mid-sized companies, which means some company paid them a bunch of money to have the banner ad. And they're able to say, we want articles that are related to mid-sized companies because we want to attract those companies to that readership area. So they'll see our banner, right? That's what that really is. And so it was Dell, as it turns out. And you've written for us before. Would you consider writing for us again? So I carefully considered that for a millisecond and, you know, said, yes. And so we've got 4 more up there now. I'm working with an editor who's really nice. Bob's helped me some, but I've kind of gotten a relationship with the editor. And so there's 4 up now. I just submitted an outline for the next one. I'd love to get, it's a year long. It's a very long one of these. I'd love to get another 10 up there. So I can kind of say I'm now current and ongoing with Harvard Business Review. So that's how that's really happened. The stories that Harvard Business Review will publish have a higher standard than Forbes. Forbes, I can write it on my own and put it up, and they're solid. But the ones for Harvard Business Review, standard is much higher. My editor will really work over it. She wants to see outlines. And then there's an editor above her that'll come back with other questions. And it is definitely a lot of work. Probably my time alone is at least 10 to 15 hours. And I get some editing help as well. That's maybe another 5 or 8 hours. But they're really powerful. And I'm honored to be there.
It's a great name to drop. One of my authors called me one day, Robert, and said, Henry, I've got news. I've just had an article picked up in the Harvard Business Review. And I said, no way. Then there's this awkward silence. And I said, in California, no way means that's awesome. Wonderful.
Right.
I wasn't questioning that you couldn't do it. But yeah, great story. And some takeaways there. Relationships. It's all about relationships, and then once to get in the door, but once you get in the door, you've got to deliver and to a standard. So thank you for sharing on that. So Mighty Mid-Sized Companies, great 3-letter title. It's a trifecta title. It's a great speech title. I imagine, can I reach you at robert@mightymidsizedcompanies.com? Do you accept email there? If not, there's an idea.
Yeah, I don't know that I do. I think I bought the URL. It may forward automatically, but
that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
Good idea.
But why mid-sized companies? What made you go in that direction?
So, it's funny. I didn't originally go in that direction. I just started looking for business anywhere I could find it, right? And I'm in California, Northern California, near San Francisco, startup land. Startups can't pay. I was never a venture-backed CEO guy. I was running a, privately held company that grew up into mid-sized. And so it's what I knew. And so as I started to look for companies to help, startups not paying anything, it was these mid-sized companies. And I've never been a big corporate guy working at some giant firm. So what do I know about that? But I do know, and I'm an organized person, and you get into mid-size, you need to start to organize and creating processes, and that's kind of natural for me. And so it really was when I reflected back that first time after, 6 years in consulting, and I said, what were my best clients? And they were all these mid-sized clients. They had fun complexity to get into, and they were building teams, and they needed business planning because it wasn't one person just remembering it all. And that kind of epiphany came out of someone sort of dragging me through what I loved and what worked and what was unique and what was different. And honestly, the most embarrassing question, right? When Bob said, so you're going to write a book about, whatever it was. And he says, have you looked to see who else has written books? And if the book's already been written, it's maybe not good to write one just like that. And I'm like, oh. And so it was lucky that midsize is a really overlooked place. And so it developed that way. And then with Mighty Midsize coming out, we had a lot of people in the audience saying, yeah, that's right. All these startup books and all these giant company books, but we are a different group. And this coincided with Ohio State founding the National Center for the Middle Market, which helped a little bit in terms of quantitative research.
What is the definition that you use for a company of this size?
So the National Center for the Middle Market has defined it as 10 million revenues to $1 billion, pretty broad, but you got to realize the $20 billion companies think of those little pesky $1 billion companies as startups.
Yeah.
So there is a range. For my practice, ideal for me is probably 10 million to 200 million. It's when they're forming more processes, they're more teenager-like. At 500 million, most businesses have a lot of process. They're starting to feel bigger to me, but that's how I broadly define it.
Okay. I know Visage International, the CEO peer-to-peer group, they're kind of looking at that 10 to 100 million. Would you consider that small business?
No, 10 to 100 million, that's our sweet spot. I'm a Vistage resource speaker. It is, and there's even some businesses that get into mid-size sooner. So it's partly revenue, but it's really about complexity. So when you can't have one leader and 10 followers, you start to need to have a team of leaders. Has to do with the complexity of management, complexity of products or service generation. It's the advent of complexity that really marks it. So it could be that some even get in at 5 million.
Interesting. Now, when you were researching the book, was there a surprise, some aha that you discovered along the way?
So the biggest one was landing business while doing research. That was I did not see that coming. It was very welcomed. It's a lot easier to pay for editing help when you get a couple of giant clients showing up. So that was nice. I think that was it. There was a few, you remember I'd written the 12 growth killers in the year before I decided to actually start doing research-based research. And so I was fully expecting, because I'm always completely right about everything, that in my research, I would get the exact same 12, right? But I didn't. So there were some that I presumed would be more common, but there was just no evidence of them coming up. And so I think those were some surprises. I think the other big learning, and maybe it was a surprise, is to really manage the research. I got into M&A and did like 50 researches around M&A, which is only one chapter. And you don't need to go that deep, right? You have to sort of define your areas, define how deep you go in. And so there's an efficiency to research that's pretty important as well.
And we have a question from Chris Hodges. He says, Robert, do you think the first book should be short or longer to establish yourself as an expert? And we can also define short and long, probably in word count. You'd mentioned a 30,000 word book. So what's your thinking on that? The first book, is it short so they read it quick, or is it thicker, longer, so you're seen as this expert?
And I'm not the expert. I've had my pass through it. I think longer and thicker doesn't mean expertise. I think when they read whatever it is you write, an article, a white paper, or a book, if it's powerfully written, if there is true thought leadership, like, aha, there are lights coming on, you're blowing their mind as they read through it, you only need 2 or 3 of those. And they're like, wow, this guy is thinking of stuff that I wouldn't have thought of. I want to know this person. What I hate, and maybe it's because I'm too analytical, is nice, thick books that just say the same dang thing over and over again. You're just repeating it, and you're like, I'm halfway through, but I'm not seeing anything new. That does not make me want to hire that person. And so I think the book's important, the content's important, but the other thing that I learned along the way was it's content times number of touches to desired audience. So if I write the world's most powerful article that nobody reads, I'm dead in the water. And so you can do too much content development, which I fell into for a while, like great, but nobody's reading it, Rob. So you need to get it out through social media. Do you need a newsletter? How are you going to push that out? And not push out to anybody. I need typically CEOs of mid-sized companies who are growing to read it. And they're the ones that are most likely to pick me. And so, if you've got 30,000 words in you and they're powerful and they're innovative, I would think create that book, get it out there. And it's not the end point. The book is the beginning. And so then how do I build the connectivity? How do I get out there with it? And you know what? If you start learning quickly that there's another 30,000 words that should follow that, because you're out and you're mixing it up with the people in your community, then great, then do the second one. So many people never write a book, right? I'm going to write a book someday, and they never do. And so my advice often for people that want to be thought leaders is just start. And if it's a powerful article or an interview or 5 interviews, and then you write a little white paper, that gets you that momentum. Better to get started than wait to do something huge. And that's my opinion. I hope that's the official word there. But
well, Robert, you've been in publishing. The joke in the industry is every business book is really 9 pages. But nobody would buy 9 pages. So we have to expand it with more stuff. A follow-up question was, what's your feeling like? How many people get the book, read it, and how many just scan it?
Probably the truth is a majority scan it. The number of people who actually read all the way books all the way through is smaller than we all want to think. The way the book was laid out, and the new books, though, even reading a chapter might be enough. And I'm okay with that. If they say, hey, there's a chapter on acquisitions being a growth killer, I'm thinking of doing an acquisition, and they go there and they read that, I'm okay with that. They just read one chapter and say, I need to call Rob, or it helps them. A lot of people get helped. Each chapter has an assessment. We try to get them onto the web page. Of course, it's an audio book. I have one client, still a client to this day, got the book, started to read it, downloaded the audio, and then drove his car around listening to it until he finished it, because but he's not a reader, he's a listener. And so I think both count. I think it's rare, though, that like that first client I had that just sees the book and then hires you. That hasn't happened again, as far as I know.
Mark Leblanc has a story that he tells about a big assignment he got, and the CEO, he found out later, only got to page 2 on the book. But that was all he needed to make the decision. So CEO readers are very much like that. They don't do that.
Right.
Okay, speaking. Let's talk speaking, because you mentioned you're a resource speaker for Vistage. And how much speaking do you do, and how do you get booked as a speaker?
So, pre-COVID, right?
Right, the former days.
Right. So, so I've got someone on my team that I hired about 4 months after we came out with Mighty, who is my marketing person. And so part of her job is to manage speaking and look for speaking. Speaking is still hard. Vistage, I got in because I, through a network, knew a guy who got my book. He might have seen it at the book party launch. Maybe that was a takeaway. And he was a lawyer, and I tried to buddy up with lawyers and bankers or anybody to say, look, you bring the audience, I'll bring the entertainment. I don't know if I gave away books or they would buy the books. It depended on what they would do. And so that was one of the strongest directions I went early on, in that I'd say, look, you're a commercial banker, bring half clients, half prospects. I'm not going to charge you a thing. I'll show up. There'll be 18 people around the table, and we have a really good little workshop. It's an hour and a half. It's a value add for their clients and so on. So Vistage came about because I did that in Sacramento, and the lawyer happened to be in a Vistage group who knew. He invited a bunch of his Vistage buddies. They all really liked it. They told their Vistage chair, we need this guy in the Vistage group. And so I got my first 2 at bats at Vistage, which is what they require. They don't pay for the first 2, but if you get a 4 or above, you get listed. And that's led to, 100 or 150 Vistage talks. And so that was helpful. The talk that I got in Canada might have come from the PR. So when I first launched Mighty, I had a PR firm help me, and they got me 30 different, online podcast type interviews and a few article placements and so on. And I'm pretty sure that one of those somebody read up in Canada and said, oh, this guy would be a good speaker. And that one I got paid 10 grand for. That's kind of an all-time peak. And I got a great client out of it. And, subsequent to that, it's looking around. Every time I speak, at the bottom of the feedback form is, do you know a speaking opportunity? And so I get some coming in that way. It's decreased over time as far as bigger speaking gigs that just come because you have, the book is not new anymore. So hopefully that will pick up some. But it's just always being on the prowl and always looking for it. I've had, like, one guy ran a boiler distribution firm. And at one point I had Preeti on my team reaching out to my connections and just saying, hey, Rob asked me to check in with you. Do you know anybody? And the third time he said, I started a whole association of boiler reps. You should come speak. And that led to a double appearance and a number of great clients. And another time, one of my principals had used a sort of an investment banker type group for the engineering services and put my name in, and ended up speaking there now twice and got a number of great clients out of that group. So just chasing it down on an ongoing basis.
Robert, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon and sharing some wisdom and insights here. I think it was very valuable. We certainly appreciate it. And again, if they want to find more information about you or your company, where should they go look?
Best place is to our website, www.ceo.biz. And you can find me there and get an idea of what the site looks like. Although in about a month, it will just flip over to the new site. You get to see that one too. Okay.
And then, of course, you're still writing for Forbes?
Yes.
And, yeah. So they can look you up by your name and Forbes.com and get some insights from you there. Okay. Thank you so much for being our guest. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next week. We're going to have John Lockhorst talk about business development. And thank you all. Have a great long weekend and be safe and sane. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Mark.